your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello and thanks for joining us. Alberta's latest budget outlook shows that jobs are up, the deficit is down, and oil and gas prices have surged. Finance Minister Travis Taves says the deficit is expected to be $5.8 billion when the government closes the books this fiscal year on March 31st. That's almost a third of the deficit Taves predicted when he tabled the budget last February. Since then, Alberta's resource-driven economy has sailed higher than expected, with demand increasing as the global economy slowly emerges from COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. To discuss this in more detail, Hal Roberts sat down with our legislative reporter and Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson.
Tyler, what are the main reasons why the deficit may be a little lower than we anticipated for our province?
The simple answer basically is that energy revenues are up, energy royalties paid from the oil and gas sector. Our government is extremely dependent on royalties from energy resources in order to do its budget every year. That's why the provincial sales tax thing comes up every year or two. And so, back in February when they made the last budget and in the updates since, there'd been some real dire predictions about what the state of the province's finances were going to be. But there has been a little bit of a turnaround in the economy in the last few months. And that means that money's flowing back into government coffers. So they're looking at a deficit that's about $4 billion lower, and then deficits for the next couple of years, but again, lower deficits than had initially been predicted. So, a little bit of good economic news, and also something that's going to make the budgeting process a heck of a lot easier for Jason Kenney's government going into the next year.
We'll have more from Hal Roberts and Tyler Dawson a little later on in the show. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf jetted off to Santa Fe, New Mexico this week. Neudorf represented Alberta at the 2021 Council of State Governments National Conference. The purpose of the trip is to work with legislators and provide Alberta's perspective on key policy issues, including the importance of trade, investment, energy infrastructure, and economic growth for Alberta. Premier Jason Kenney's office has filed a defense of a lawsuit from a former senior staffer. Ariella Kimmel, who was a chief of staff in the government, was fired in February and is suing for back pay and damages. The lawsuit alleges Kimmel was subject to abuse before being fired for raising concerns about sexual harassment involving a member of her team. In the statement of defense, the government says Kimmel had been a problem employee and was criticizing and spreading personal details about her colleagues and supervisors. Two Lethbridge, Alberta police officers have made national headlines after being demoted following their disciplinary hearing on November 30th for their involvement in a social media chat room dubbed Memegate. Constables Matthew Rilkoff and David Easter have both been demoted from their rank of Senior Constable Level 2 to First Class Constable Level 1. Each officer pleaded guilty on November 2nd to participating in chat room discussions that took place over a 4-month period back in 2018 that disseminated disparaging memes of upper management of the Lethbridge Police Service and of Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips. The officers pleaded guilty to 4 counts, including engaging in discreditable conduct, insubordination, and neglect of duty. 2 other counts were withdrawn. 3 other officers have also been charged with misconduct in the same matter. 2 have now resigned, and the remaining officers' proceedings are still ongoing. Sergeant Jason Moulton will find out the fate of his career on January 10th. RCMP in Cardston, Alberta have responded to comments made on social media after it was discovered that one of their officers used a taser on a man from the Blood Tribe. On November 23rd, a confrontation ensued on the Kainai Nation between Dylan Bird, who was wanted for outstanding warrants, and an RCMP officer from Cardston, where the officer was being threatened with what appeared to be a metal pipe. The officer's dash cam footage captured the incident where the officer told Bird to drop the pipe, but instead Bird attacked him with it.
An interaction occurred in which the subject struck the officer with the metal pipe, and our officer deployed a conducted energy weapon. Both the first and second deployments of the conducted energy weapon were unsuccessful in gaining control of the subject. At 9:30 a.m., our officer called for assistance. A nearby officer immediately attended the location to assist in the subject's arrest. As the subject continued to be combative and resistant, Officers used force to take him into custody.
WRIGHT says the officer was treated for his injuries in hospital and was later released. Police say they are conducting an internal review to gather a full account of what exactly transpired. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more of our top stories from around the province. Stay with us. Welcome back. This past Tuesday, Parliament passed a tougher new bill to ban conversion therapy in Canada. Justice Minister David LAMETTI and Women and Gender Equality Minister Marcy Ian spoke to Canadians about the bill.
The bill we introduced in the House today proposes 4 new criminal code offences: causing any person to undergo conversion therapy, removing a minor from Canada to subject them to conversion therapy abroad, profiting from providing conversion therapy, and fourthly, promoting or advertising an offer to provide conversion therapy. These dangerous practices simply must end.
Everyone deserves to live a true life, free from discrimination, free from persecution. Yet LGBTQ2 communities continue to experience high rates of harassment, bullying. They are victims of violence simply for being themselves.
Devin Hargraves, who ran as the federal Liberal candidate in Lethbridge, spearheaded the campaign to have conversion therapy banned not just in Lethbridge, but across Canada. Earlier this week, Hargraves said the fact that the bill was back on the table was something he's looked forward to.
Conversion therapy is the horrific practice of trying to change one's gender or identity from being a member of the LGBTQ2+ community to being straight heterosexual. It's been long regarded as almost a form of torture. I think that the fact that it's been allowed to be legal for this long in Canada is a very sad stain on our history. I'm happy that myself and many other advocates have been able to get this to the forefront and to get this addressed. And I think Prime Minister Trudeau and our Minister of Justice, David LAMETTI, have made a very strong point by making this one of the first 4 pieces of legislation that they are trying to pass.
The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms announced its intention to challenge Transport Canada's Ministerial Order 47 in federal court. The order announced by Ottawa prevents Canadians who have not received the COVID-19 vaccine from boarding planes, trains, and marine passenger vessels anywhere in Canada. President of the Justice Centre, John Carpe, says this is a direct violation of our rights and freedoms.
The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees Canadians the right to freely enter and freely leave Canada and travel freely across Canada. And now this fundamental constitutional right is being denied to Canadians that are exercising another constitutional right, the right to bodily autonomy, which is the right to decide for yourself whether to get injected with something or whether to get a medical treatment. And the government just has no scientific basis to justify excluding unvaccinated Canadians from air and train travel.
Cargill and the union representing meatpackers have reached a tentative deal a few days before a strike deadline. The United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 401, which represents around 2,000 workers at the plant, recommended its members accept the contract offer. Some of the terms of the new contract include a large wage increase, which includes a $1,000 signing bonus, along with a $1,000 COVID-19 bonus. It also contains provisions to facilitate a new culture of health and safety in the workplace. The Cargill meat packing plant was the site of a major COVID outbreak in May of last year. More than 900 workers tested positive for the virus, and 3 deaths were linked to the outbreak. The Cargill plant in High River processes around 35% of Canada's beef production. The Nature Conservancy of Canada says it's secured a 43-hectare parcel of land adjacent to Waterton Lakes National Park. The Belly River property is beside the Belly River that supplies habitat for birds, amphibians, and fish that inhabit those water systems.
from a species point of view, this is really great because Waterton Lakes National Park connects to various other protected spaces. So, the parks on the U.S. side of the border, if we go north, there's the Castle Crow's Nest area, Kananaskis, Banff, Jasper. This is a really key area for linking wildlife corridors. And so by creating more of a safe space for animals to move and live through, we're ensuring that those wide-ranging carnivores like cougars and wolves, bobcats, grizzly bears, they still have habitat to thrive in.
Officials with the Nature Conservancy say grizzly bears are designated as a species of concern under Canada's Species at Risk Act. Native grasslands are home to 85% of Alberta's species at risk, and 2/3 of the Belly River property is native grasslands. Coming up after the break, our legislative reporter says it appears as though the Kenney government may be backing off of its vaccine requirements for healthcare workers. Stay with us, that's next. Welcome back. As we come to the close of 2021, the Alberta government is looking forward to a growing economy in 2022, and part of that plan is $10 a day daycare, which sounds like a great idea, but how will it be implemented? Our legislative reporter explains, along with the province seemingly backing off from vaccine requirements for healthcare workers. Take a look.
Predictions by RBC and ATB suggest that Alberta will have the highest rate of growth in the country in 2022. Home sales in Calgary apparently have hit record levels, and tech investment is up. Is it safe to say that maybe we're turning the corner here in our province?
Well, predictions like that, I think, you risk making a fool of yourself, but certainly it's promising news. The metrics are looking good. Unemployment is back up to or down, I suppose, to where we were at pre-pandemic levels. So we're not at like boom time levels yet, but we're back to, the normal we've had for the last 5 years or so. There have been big tech investments with Amazon, for example, and those are maybe a sign of some of this diversification stuff that politicians and analysts have been talking about for years. And this growth, about 6% growth, I think, is what those reports had predicted. Now, the thing to keep in mind, of course, is that Alberta's economy contracted more than any other economy in the country, with the exception of the Northwest Territories. So we have a bigger hole to climb out of. But the sort of casting forward, things are looking quite good for the economy, which of course it's good news for everyday Albertans who are looking to find jobs and for their kids to find jobs and things like that. But it's also it's sort of politically important because Jason Kenney obviously has had some troubles as leader of the United Conservative Party and as leader of the government. There's an election in a year and a half, so on the political side of things, an economy turning around is a very good sign for Jason Kenney's Conservatives over the next year and a half.
Alberta Health Services has apparently backed off a little on mandating vaccines for healthcare workers. We've interviewed a number of nurses here in the province who've said that, they're going to have to leave their occupation entirely because they don't like being forced to have to get the COVID-19 jab. Now, the deadline was November 30th for a lot of these healthcare professionals, and a number of the unvaccinated staff were put on unpaid leave, such as the nurses we interviewed. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so it's sort of a strange setup that they've got here. Basically, they looked at some of the sites in the province and said, there's simply not enough people working at some of these sites that we can, fully enforce this policy. So I believe it's about 250 healthcare workers are affected by this at 16 sites or something like that around the province. Now, what that's going to mean for them is they can do testing. They'll have to pay for it within 48 hours of their shift, I believe, and then they can work. The issue sort of being that, if these people had been put on unpaid leave, there simply wouldn't have been enough people to deliver healthcare in those parts of the province. But obviously, in the major centers, the people who have not been vaccinated will be put on unpaid leave. And I believe the deadline for some of these things has been pushed back to December 13th. So, they've backed off a little bit in some of these areas where there would be a bit of a crisis in the healthcare system, but not fully. We saw in Quebec, for example, they fully backed off of this promise, and Ontario never really went down that road. So it's just notable because, British Columbia, I think, is the only sort of big province that has sort of successfully gone ahead with this and stuck to its guns on it throughout the process. So, good news for some of the unvaccinated workers in some of these areas, and also important news probably for the people who need healthcare, who, will be able to get it.
Tyler, the $10 a day childcare deal was announced recently, but the province's parents may actually begin applying for the subsidy in January.
That's right. So this was, a huge announcement a couple weeks ago. Big election promise from the Trudeau Liberals. Alberta was seen as sort of a bit of a holdout on getting this money, and now some details sort of coming out on when these sort of things are going to be rolling out. And that's right. Applications in January, and it's kind of a complicated process in terms of subsidies to the daycare provider, subsidies to the parents, things like that. And Alberta's program, I want to mention this because I think it's really important to how Alberta's program works. Is that it is sort of means tested. There, up to $180,000 family income, you get sort of money for this, and it's a graded scale. So you get cheaper daycare if your income's less than 120,000, and then it's a little bit more expensive up to 180,000, which is, I think, at this point unique in how other provinces are doing this. So it's just worth noticing that, and also that the actual process for seeing how this is going to work is beginning to start. And the other thing I should mention is also in the spring of 2022, the government says that's when it's going to start creating these new spaces.
Up next, we speak with the man who calls himself the Angry Albertan. We'll find out why he's so angry. But first, a quick break. Keep it right here.
The Angry Albertan didn't actually exist until May of 2020, but we had been out there protesting for a couple of months before that. And it's just a means to get information out to the public that doesn't have to go through the censors of the mainstream media and our government to get out there.
Social media has given people a way to communicate and express their thoughts and experiences. One Alberta man started a podcast and social media page called The Angry Albertan. Joshua Switzer-Crow joined me earlier this week via Zoom from Edmonton to talk about his online mission. Joshua, your page has grown to over 60,000 followers in just a year and a half. So that's like tremendous organic growth. So for anyone who hasn't heard of you, what's the focus of your podcast and of your page, The Angry Albertan?
Well, it didn't start as a podcast. It started as a protest movement. So we've been protesting at the legislature grounds basically every Saturday since April 29th, 2020. So we've been out there for, a year and 3/4 or whatever it is now. The podcast grew out of that. And the whole point of the thing, honestly, I thought we'd just be able to, I'm a self-employed business person. My business was dramatically affected at the beginning of the lockdowns. And I thought, geez, we could just knock this out with a few protests, get everything back to normal because, I was scared to death of this pandemic when I first saw it on the horizon in December of 2019. Both my wife and I were worried about it. And we were tracking it, running our own numbers all the way through. And, by February, we were just like, I don't think this is it. This isn't as big as they're claiming it's going to be. But the restrictions just kept getting more and more restrictive, and the panic just kept increasing by every minute of every day. They were just pushing more fear at us. Yeah. And I wasn't seeing anything in the public sphere that was countering this narrative of fear. So that's why I jumped in and started up the Angry Albertan page. It was a bit of a process to get there. The Angry Albertan didn't actually exist until May of 2020, but we had been out there protesting for a couple of months before that. And it's just a means to get information out to the public that doesn't have to go through the censors of the mainstream media and our government to get out there.
You said your business was affected. What did you do? What was your business?
I'm a nobody. I'm a local piano tuner, so I make your pianos sound beautiful. I tune for all sorts of churches, and I used to claim that I tuned for the education department at the University of Alberta, but I got an email from them saying I'm not even allowed on the property anymore because I am not double vaccinated. But I still tune in clients' homes without a mask. I'm mask exempt. That's still probably costing me business, but it's actually gained me business as well because a lot of people aren't comfortable with masked men in their homes.
What were you expecting when you started the page and the podcast? Did you think it was going to grow like this?
I hoped it would grow. I knew there would be growth. I didn't think it would get as big as it's gotten. I've never done anything like this. Like I say, I'm a nobody. I'm the last person you would ever expect to have, their own podcast and, thousands of people watching. I mean, we've had videos get 1.5 million views. We've had a couple of videos get over 1 million views. So that's insane. So I'm quite recognizable. I joke, I say I'm the most hated man in Alberta. That's often how I introduce myself now. And because in the beginning of this, people were threatening to burn down my house. I saw Dr. Joe Vipond whining because there were people threatening to protest outside of his house. And he was taking that as a big threat to his safety. Well, Dr. Joe, come check out my pile of death threats someday.
Oh, I can imagine. So obviously what you're doing has impacted a lot of people, some in positive ways, some in not so positive ways. Have you received any feedback from the government about this, especially since you still go to the legislature every Saturday to protest? What are they saying?
Well, in the beginning of this, Jason Kenney really seemed to care what people thought. He would actually respond to our actions directly. I organized a call-in campaign where we clogged up his phone lines for a couple of weeks. Like if you wanted to get to his receptionist, you would wait on hold for 3 or 4 hours.
Oh.
And so we knew he was listening. He even mentioned me in one of his live streams, his media availabilities. There are some angry pages on Facebook that would have you believe. So I know he watches and I know he pays attention. But lately he has been doing his very best to pretend that we don't exist.
What advice would you give to Albertans, and what advice would you give to the government? They say that healthcare resources are stretched too thin. So what would you say to them as a path forward?
We need to stay credible. We can't let the crazies get in front of this and demand civil war and all this crazy stuff. There is a peaceful way out of this. Our government has checks and balances. It's a scale. They've tipped that scale one way. It is our job to tip it the other way.
Next, we feature some of the top local stories from around southern Alberta. Stay with us.
We are in a period of severe stresses period. So the pandemic just added to an awful lot of fears and anxieties that people had.
A Lethbridge man caught dealing drugs nearly 2 years ago has been sent to a federal penitentiary. Nicholas Galbraith, who pleaded guilty in September to drug possession and trafficking, was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Police say Galbraith was watched for 6 days back in March of 2020, where he was engaged in illicit drug activity. In addition to his prison term, Galbraith will be prohibited from possessing certain types of weapons after his release. During the month of November, you may have seen all kinds of facial hair appearing on the men in your lives. Interesting mustaches were grown for an annual campaign called Movember to raise funds for support those battling prostate and testicular cancer, plus raise awareness of suicide prevention in men. As Micah Quinn explains, groups from the town of Claresholm joined forces to grow their own stylish stashes while raising money for this great cause.
Members of the Mustaches of Motown from the town of Claresholm, the Mounted Mustaches from the Claresholm and Nanton RCMP, the I'm Too Sparky for My Stash from the Claresholm Fire Department, and the I'm a Stash You a Question from the Willow Creek Composite High School grew their best mustaches to see who could raise the most amount of money for the Movember fundraiser. Kyle Ikema and Holly Gillespie started the fundraiser as a way to rally the community together for a good cause, regardless of the current COVID restrictions.
I was looking for something to kind of raise awareness for that, and especially with a lot of the first responders in town, that getting them on board and really being a voice for that and advocating for that. So that was a big reason why I wanted to kind of spearhead this fundraiser.
After final tallies on Wednesday morning, the I'm Too Sparky for My Stash team from the Claresholm Fire Department came out on top with the win.
The total amount raised now is $3,295, which is like phenomenal. Our first goal was 1,000, and then it changed to 2,000, and we never thought we would be able to raise this much.
Gillespie and Ikema are hoping to do the Movember fundraiser every year moving forward, especially considering the huge outpouring of support they received this time around.
And the last 3 days have just been donations being pumped in from people wanting to just get these guys in a friendly competition, I guess. So I am incredibly, incredibly grateful. And I was actually shocked with the numbers this morning when we got to work. So I kind of speechless about it, actually.
Close to $25 million was raised in Canada for the Movember campaign in 2020. The money for the fundraiser goes to supporting and raising awareness for men's health projects focused on mental health and suicide prevention, as well as prostate and testicular cancer. These projects are funded directly by Movember or through other health partners. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The historic Annandale House in Lethbridge has stood tall for over 100 years in our city. A local couple purchased the house over 35 years ago and decorated it for Christmas. As Micah Quinn explains, there are all sorts of holiday trinkets located in and outside of the house.
My mother, she lived in Tabor at that time. She came up and she said, "Who put those lights up there?" And I said, "Well, I did." And she said, "Well, Garfield, I want you to promise never to do that again."
Fortunately, Garfield Bland didn't listen to his mother, and now Lethbridge has a beautiful sight to behold during the Christmas holidays. Garfield and his wife Diane are the sole owners of the Annandale House. The house was built in 1909 by Lewis Martin Johnston, who was the founder of a local law firm called Huckvale and Company. Annandale got its name from the southern district of Scotland where the Johnstons came from. The house had a few owners after Johnston until the early 1980s when the Blands restored the historic house.
It's a good project because it creates family unity, it creates good feeling among the family members, and it gives them a chance to work together, because what's better than working with somebody to really get to know them?
Bland constructed a huge number of the decorations outside by himself, like this train and the nativity scene.
That and a lot of the cutouts I did, and some of it's inherited and some of it has been donated. Some of this, and we've tried to keep it all.
If you're wondering about the inside of the house, Bland also has a plethora of unique model trains.
I guess I'm sort of a civic engineer, a town planner, all clumped into one, and I find it very relaxing.
Indoor house viewings are cancelled this year, but if you're interested in an outdoor viewing, you can call Bland at 403-308-3827. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Thank you, Micah. Love that house. Coming up after the break, we speak with our city's new mayor. Keep it right here.
Well, it's great to be able to sit down with my colleagues and look at some of the different plans we have for the future of Lethbridge. And then it wrapped up last week here, a lot of our planning here with our AUMA meetings in Edmonton, so Alberta Municipality meetings in Edmonton. So yeah, it's been a really busy time.